Thank you.
There he is. I see him.
He's making it under the wire. The clock. His pumpkin and coach has not yet left the station. Hello, friends on Zoom. If you can hear us and see us, wave your hand. Well, metaphorically, that is. I have to wait until the official time clock starts us so we can be official tonight. Okay, very good. Well, by my watch, it is almost the bewitching hour. What are you doing?
I'm distancing.
Oh.
A little too close in here.
Oh, no problem.
I'm fine.
I thought it was something I may have said. Yeah, that's right. It's something I exude. Yeah, maybe not confidence. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? Well, Brianna, I think we're at 7 o'clock. So I will call this study session for the Lakewood City Council to order for Monday, September 27th, 2021. And I am pleased that we have our friends with the Landmarks and Heritage Advisory Board tonight to present us with their work plan and to have kind of some discussion on some great points of interest that you guys are working on this year. So I'm going to call on Chair Spieth to introduce the LHAB members and to kind of go through your work plan. And as indicated by this incredible, horrible backfeed echo that I have, we will do our best to communicate well in the microphones because we are trying to record tonight's session for the benefit of all those who might be interested. And I believe we may have a member or two of LHAB on Zoom, so certainly give that member a chance to say hello as well. So we will do, I think, as best we can. Brianna is monitoring the mic, so I will turn mine off so that you guys can turn yours on when you're speaking to avoid the overlap and the weird echo. Glenn, it's all yours.
Okay, I'm Glenn Spieth, Chair of the Landmarks and Heritage Advisory Board. We have Joan Cooley, Beth Campbell, and Christina Minetti is probably on the screen.
Hello.
And our council liaison is Patty Bell. Staff support is Courtney Brunell. Administrative support is Karen Devereaux. We meet the fourth Thursday of every month, 6 p.m. at City Hall in the American Lake room. 2020 accomplishments. We were awarded last year a grant from Pierce County for historic street signs. And many of those have already been installed. We have a second group for this year also. And we also met with the Clover Park District to express an interest in developing pop-up museum for the, it says 2020, but that got kind of fouled up because there wasn't much of a 2020.
Right.
So hopefully this year we can continue on with that. In 2021, we're exploring more options to increase youth engagement, including website update, launching of the updated Lakewood Touring Map. We just did an update of the touring map, so it's my copy's all marked up, but that should be coming here before long. probably not very apparent, but some of the black roads are marked in blue for some of the historic roads. So we'll see how that all turns out once it's done. So this year, we've got another group of historic streets that are in the recognition program. They haven't all been determined, but the ones that we already have displayed are Bridgeport, and that was a historic name. Gravity Lake Drive, which was the old Speedway, and Gravity Lake Drive Southwest. Gravity Lake Drive, at least a part of it, was the old Speedway itself. Hipkins Road, which was Prairie Road, Lakeview Avenue, which was also the old Motor Speedway. Motor Avenue, which has been named Motor Avenue for a long time because that was a trolley line at the time before cars. Pacific Highway South was historic Highway 99. The Lakeview Avenue was also Highway 99 because it made a turn in Stillicum Boulevard, came down and went south. That's the old highway. Stillicum Boulevard had many names. It was a military road. It was probably an Indian trail prior to that. In the 1850s, it became the Bird Mill Road. And it was later in the 20s or 30s that it was renamed Washington State Road Number 1, or at least in addition, it was named that. Ongoing projects for 2021. We don't have any specific timelines to complete many of these things. They've been ongoing for a year or so. Now we're finally getting back on track. Implement more of the historic streets recognition program. And we've applied for a Pierce County Historic Preservation Grant for those street names again, like we did with the ones installed last year. Continue to work with Clover Park School District to incorporate local Lakewood history in their curriculum.
So how is that going? When you say continue to work with, what specifically are you folks, how are you interacting with the school district to
Well, it's
integrate?
been slow for right now because they're pretty busy just keeping the school activities going, but we're trying to get them interested in the pop-up museum concept and having lectures and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So we have a research grant opportunities to fund historic markers throughout Lakewood. I don't know the results of the tax advisory board funding, but we had it in there for at least a couple historic markers and maybe more depending on the current price. Right now, Woodbrook Hunt Club was in contact with me, and they're working on a grant through Pierce County, and they're going to have our historic marker on a stone with I believe it's a fox, bronze fox on the top of the stone. So they're working with us and trying to get these things going. We've been delayed about 3 years so far. So I mentioned the Lakewood Touring Map and showed you a copy of that. We've been working with Pretty Gritty Tours to develop a walking tour map through the city. And that's been on hold for a while, and we're going to try and ramp that back up. We're going to be developing more frequently asked questions to be included on the LHAB website. I guess the website is underway to start putting some of that stuff on the website. We're strongly concerned or considering the community landmark designation for a lot of landmarks. This is one where we don't require any kind of special considerations for windows, and there's no requirements by the city to justify any changes people make to their building. It's strictly a community or city landmark designation that hopefully honors the properties, such as the Colonial Center, Western State Hospital, Rosalie, Carmen Villa, which is Madeira, the Flood House, Little Church on the Prairie, Thornwood Castle, Mueller Harkins Airport Hangar, Tacoma Golf and Country Club, the H Barns at Steilacoom Park, Bolero Lanes, Denny's, House of Donuts, and the Allen Liddy House. There are more that we are exploring, but got to take it slow, I guess. It's been slow for the last couple of years. Work on recruitment of new members. That's always been kind of a difficult process. It's hard to find people that are interested in historic preservation. And so we're all working toward that as well as we can. We're also actively engaging with the Lakewood City Youth Council on an ongoing basis. We've had a youth council representative for a number of years in the past. I don't know if there's any that are assigned right now. There is a proposed new item, create short story, the history of Lakewood, post online to engage youth and online viewers. Consider the partnership of the Lake or Clover Park School District and create videos and offer them as a resource for schools to learn, schools and students to learn about local history. One other area that I have been interested in for a number of years is I've always believed that objects that came from Lakewood ought to be displayed in Lakewood. However, most everything nowadays belongs to the state. I would like to see some kind of an arrangement where the landmarks board or a separate board or a separate group with city authorization can go look through these areas that are being put through construction digging so we can find artifacts, and we never know what we're going to find. Some of them can be significant. Many of them are just run-of-the-mill things, but they illustrate our own history here, similar to the Bird Schools dig. But I'd like to find a contact with the city to start working on something like that. I don't necessarily have to be involved, but I've done it for quite a few years. So I would, and I can't quite do many things that I used to be able to do. So But I am interested and have the equipment available to find most things if it's asked. Otherwise, the stuff gets plowed away, buried, taken out of the Lakewood area, used for fill someplace else. So we don't know what we're missing. Mike Avey which was our local archaeologist out of Pierce College. He had a tremendous collection of Lakewood artifacts, 62 boxes that the school donated to the Burke Museum. However, in order to get objects from that cache, it would cost us $100 per item to rent on a short-term basis just to display. And I think most of the Lakewood artifacts ought to be displayed in Lakewood. I know that we've probably got a number of original Fort Steilacoom artifacts in the Lakewood Museum. However, Fort Steilacoom doesn't have very many, if any, of their own. So I think that's a good place for Fort Steilacoom artifacts to be displayed, as well as our museum. It all plays into the history. And that's about all I've got for tonight. Any questions? Any comments from our board?
Yeah, why don't we open it up to your board and see what other comments they may have?
One of the reasons that we really want to get engaged with the youth council is that, you know, we'd like to help develop some curriculum for Washington State history that's local to Lakewood. And it'd be really great to get some input from the kids about what would make it interesting for them, and maybe kind of crowdsource a little stuff too. Get the high schoolers to work on stuff for the fourth graders and see what's interesting. So
I think it's a
also
great
maybe
idea.
provide a resource for homeschoolers in the area also. So we're looking forward to getting to meet our youth council rep too.
Well, that's a great point, and I'll make a note of it. We'll talk to Ms. Schumacher in a minute after we get the feedback. Hey, Joe.
Okay, I'm Joan Cooley, and I'd like to, first I'd like to really thank the expertise, the knowledge, the willingness to help, to take charge, not in a helpful way, not a pejorative way, to thank Courtney Brunel and Karen Devereaux, well, and Ramon as well. But Courtney and Karen are there at every meeting. They're knowledgeable. We've had several staff people, as you all, those of you who've been around a while, and I've been on the board, I don't know, 12 years. I have no idea. But Courtney and Karen are just outstanding employees. I cannot say enough good things about them. They're always organized. They are always prepared. If I leave a phone message, which I did today, it was managed, even though Courtney was not here. So I'd like to just really say you have two great, well, three, counting Ramon, who I do not know as well, but wonderful employees for the city. And I would hardly recommend doing whatever it takes to keep them.
Well, we concur.
And
Thank you.
also, I'd like to say another special thank you. I think it was the Public Works Department that installed all of our new signs. And they deserve a pat on the back too, because I have a hunch that installing our historic street markers is not exactly in their job description, but they found a way to get those installed. And we're very thankful for that. Now I have a question. I recently found out about the balance between about the balance, how can I say this without getting my tongue tied? Between property owners who are property owners and renters. And the percentage surprised me when I heard the difference.
Mhm.
And I was kind of flummoxed about it. And I'd just been processing this information over this weekend. And so I haven't brought it up to our group at all yet. But is there a way, and I know it's often thought that renters are not invested in the communities in which they live, since they don't have home ownership as an anchor to tie them to a lot of the things. But I also know that's a misconception as well. But I think that's an untapped resource for us on LHAB. And I'm wondering how, I don't know the management system of how rental properties ownership versus being managed, how papers or information is given to them. So I'm asking
Mhm.
how you might help us. And I'm thinking of our new map. It would be great if we could get the new touring map directly into the hands of new renters of the renting population that comes into our community. I would think that not everybody is as interested in historic preservation as at least the three of us are. But I think there's a growing interest in that. So, and so I haven't had the opportunity to ask Courtney. She would be my first go-to, but I just thought I'd bring it up tonight as a thought that's just kind of been perking in my head to see what you think about that.
Well, Jen, that's a great question, and I will try to field an answer, and I'll open it up to the group here. My first response would be whether one's a renter or a homeowner, they're a resident of
They're
Lakewood.
residents, right?
Yeah, and so to the extent we can do a good and better job of communicating all the cool things that has to do with Lakewood, including its history, we should ensure that our communication avenues fully are available to all residents, whether a renter or an owner, because as you've indicated, there are so many renters who have a very strong sense of pride in their community,
Right.
and have an ownership interest in their home, whether they rent or own. They still are very proud of where they live, and they certainly would appreciate receiving more information. So that's certainly something we can think about, how we can expand that opportunity. We do have a rental housing safety program, and through that program, we have a pretty good handle on the number of rentals in the city of Lakewood and who they're owned by and who they're managed by. So to the extent there were communications that were material to all things going on in Lakewood, we could figure out how to get that information to them. Many of them register with an email address, for instance. So there may be an opportunity we can talk about and how we can push that information out. When I was a kid growing up in Montana and elsewhere, we used to have a thing called the welcome wagon. You guys remember that? Where they would provide to new residents this packet of information and goodies and that kind of stuff. And a lot of those kinds of things came in the welcome wagon packet. I don't know who the heck ever coordinated that, but it was a great service when you were in a small community. So it may be something that would be an endeavor we can think about doing through the chamber and in combination with maybe some communication out post of the city. Mike?
I think we have one more board member.
Well, absolutely. Yep. I was just addressing Joan's question real quick though.
Well, and I think that when we first were discussing the touring map, that we did, one of the areas that we took in were realtors that served primarily our area as well as a vehicle for getting the map out. Now, I don't know what our distribution is, but we'll be coming up on a new printing. And so perhaps that will be something we should bring up then. But
I think a great suggestion, and I was going to bring this up to you guys and to Courtney, is your map really needs to be interactive. Most people are going to look at their driving map while they're in the car on their phone. So I would encourage you, and I was just going to bring that up because I'm not quite sure where you're at with everything, but you definitely need to have an interactive component with the map so people can utilize it also when they're driving about. Something else that we could do is maybe hook up with different apartment complexes That's your
Yes.
welcome wagon.
Mhm.
And so you get them into the packets when people move into all the apartment complexes, and you would have those quantities available and distribute. And I'm sure there's some sort of program or something, connections that the city
Mhm.
would have.
Thank you.
Good question, though, and we certainly want to say hello to our friends on Zoom. Christina, do you have some thoughts or input you'd like to provide?
Can you hear me today?
You certainly can.
Oh my gosh, it works. Well, hello, everybody. It was interesting for me to be able to be part of this board this year. I just began attending in March, I think. And so mostly I've been observing things that have been underway for some time already. I did have a few things that I wanted to suggest or, bring up. And mostly the answer was that, oh, we'll have to put that on the agenda for next year. So I didn't really realize that things take so long to get going in this kind of situation. But I think that there was some interest, for example, in having me look into how British towns deal with their historic buildings and the relationship with the owners, identifying them, what kinds of responsibilities the owners have, and that kind of thing. Because, of course, in Europe, there are much stricter regulations related to what you can do with your historic building once you own it. And I think that would be quite eye-opening to have people here see how other countries do it. I think that would be good. Also, I think one other thing that it would be good for the board to initiate would be some kind of inventory of historic buildings in Lakewood, because as with some other things like the Gary oak trees, I think that we don't have sight of what our assets really are. And it's hard to protect something if you don't know that it exists. For example, we were talking during one of the board meetings about identifying houses of specific architectural periods. And this would be great also to add to the touring map eventually if it expands or something. But if we don't know what we have, we can't really promote it. So I think that would be a great thing to do. And then, of course, to try to develop some kind of relationship with those homeowners. The question also would come up, and I think that maybe looking into the British situation would give some insights into this. What in other countries, it's not just an isolated house that you have, that you own, that you can do things to, but it's part of a greater context. So, for example, in Lakewood, I've seen some little old house, really adorable, but nevertheless, it was subdivided and another 5 or however many houses were squeezed on the same lot, which of course violated the original intentions of the architect, I suppose. So I think that would also be worth keeping in mind, especially since we do have this boom in subdivisions lately, and I think that will impact some of the historic architectural examples that we have in Lakewood. So I think that's about all for now. I didn't get to really participate too much because I wasn't here earlier when the street signs were underway and stuff. I kind of just got here in the tail end of it. So it's been very interesting, and I appreciate the chance to be able to try to help on this board somehow. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Before I get to you, Glenn, did you have a comment on that? And I think Ms. Moss and then Mr. Boki had some input.
Okay. I was going to make a comment on the inventory. In 1999, there was an extensive inventory done by Carolyn Galacci. And we still are using that. It was updated probably 4 or 5 years ago with color pictures. And so that's still available both at the city, and some of our members also have copies. There's an older copy at the Lakewood Museum also. So that's one comment that I can put up for right now.
Glenn, remind us what the budget is that we provide you annually. Remind us what the budget numbers are.
Yeah, that's something I don't have.
Yeah. Is it what, 5 or 6 grand, Mr. Caulfield, something like that? I know when we had the consultant involved with LHAB, we had about $500 to $7,500 annually, I think, was part of the budget.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, I don't have that information at my fingertips, but we can get it.
You know, as I remember, historically, it's been about $2,500 a year.
Right. I'm saying over the
And-
biennium.
And
Yeah,
I don't know how much the accumulation has been.
right.
There's.
Well,
a
we don't
number of our
accumulate
projects
in
that
municipal
keep it
government.
Going,
Doesn't roll over, does
Yes,
it?
not a rollover. Yeah.
yeah.
Not like unused T-Mobile minutes or anything like that. But the reason why I ask is I throw out there, once we kind of have a little bit more of a fleshed out conversation and you guys kind of gel your work plan, there may be tasks like Patty indicated that may be helpful to look at, like interactive, making history live and relevant for all of Lakewood, including its youth. Might require some tweaks to the mobile app, because the My Lakewood 311, if you look at that, it's got a lot of neat components of information. And it might be that an interactive map could be part of that, but that comes at a cost. So it might be that that could be part of your work plan, and we could help flesh out what that might cost, and then figure out maybe in the biennial budget process, whether or not an adjustment is warranted. So things like that to make history alive, because that's our push to the committee, is to make history alive and relevant. You guys do such wonderful work. You have a huge heart for it, and you're exactly right. How do we galvanize youth to make them more interested in the history of Lakewood? Because there's great history here. And how do we make it alive for the rest of all residents, whether renters, homeowners, or young kids? So,
Does the city have any interactive maps right now?
well, yeah, interactive is an interesting word, right? So we have lots
Yeah.
of maps that you can interact with,
Yeah,
or whether it's a 3D sort of thing.
because our publisher may be able
There's
to
certainly
cover
ability
that
to put
area,
that
but I
on
don't
a
think it's there.
website. And Patty would be a great one to chat about that. But you know, Jim, our communications manager, is, I think, doing a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And while we don't necessarily want to overload him with
Good idea.
more tasks than he can handle, there certainly is an opportunity for us to figure out a way to do it better. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some GIS components that we could probably talk about a little bit more. That would be really, really helpful. And so that could be intertwined with the website. And then we could also take a look at your web page. So it could be housed on there. I'm not sure about the 311 components, but it does have a lot of mapping and GIS capabilities. Again, I don't know how it operates here, so, but there's definitely awesome things to look at. I think you guys are doing an amazing job. I love seeing the historic road marker signs everywhere. Those are so fascinating for me. And then I look around even more and go look up stuff on my phone and, oh, that's what that was. So I just appreciate all that you guys are doing. And I know that you really want to get in connection with the Burke Museum. I've heard that loud and clear. I think we all have. So I think you, Jason, had talked about, Deputy Mayor had talked about trying to look in for a contact for that. So I think that's something that we want to see if we can pursue in any way also.
I think the city, with its weight with regard to the Burke Museum, may get places that I possibly can't, because they wanted $100 per item as a rental fee. So I
It's getting about as
don't,
bad as legal fees anymore, so. I
What
think
was
you had a
that?
contact for me, so bug me after this and I'll make sure I have that so I can make connections.
okay.
Ms. Moss, did you have a thought or comment? And then
Actually, I
Mr.
did, and
Boki.
you pretty much answered it because it was on budget and map, but I wanted to I wanted to ask if you guys are interacting a lot with the chamber, because that's a good way to get information out as well.
That's true. And that was one of our we had that as an early conversation when
Right.
we were, well, in one of the iterations of our.
Yeah, if you reconnect with them
Yes.
and because they do pass out maps of the city and stuff, so.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boki.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor Whalen. A couple of items. One, remember that county thing now comes out every year. The county grant money, and that's now a separate fund. They created its own special revenue fund, so I don't know that they'll have more money, but they've got a fair amount of money in that fund. And so that, usually opens up, I think, early part of the year. So be aware, and I know you're thinking about the markers or the signs, and you might want to look at some other things that what other folks are getting approved. About historic properties, along with what Mr. Spieth talked about, there was another one when the county historical dollars first became available. There was a large pool of dollars, and there was a large amount of that was not done in the grant fund. It was actually done to do a property survey. And I never saw the property survey that was done because it was like countywide, and it was several $100,000. And then one day I'm at the Lakewood Library in the reference section, and I looked down, and at the bottom of the reference, it was this book, and I believe it was this area. Now, I don't quite understand how they were putting the things. There didn't seem an order to me, right? Because I didn't have the key and I didn't have time to look at it. But anyway, that's out there somewhere. The library had it, but I'm sure somebody at the county must have it. So, because they spent a good deal of money on it, and it was probably 2007 or 8. So you might want to try to track that down.
The Lakewood one is the only one I know of, at least
Yeah.
so far.
I don't remember what it was called, but it was a property survey. And I don't know who at the county anymore would have it, but it was at the library that night. I believe that was at least for this section of town.
Mr. Branstad?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I certainly wanted to thank the board because, in our vision for the community, we're looking for a community that's sort of informed by our history and motivated by it to progress and move forward. And both what you've done and what you're proposing to do works with that well. Steve, I did have a couple of questions in your discussion. You didn't mention any interaction of the board with the Nisqually tribe, which is a farther back history than the history of the city, but for our area. And I'm wondering, are they embedded in some of the things that you told us about work with the tribe and with the tribe's interrelated history with us?
I could comment on that. We have for a number of years gotten a grant through the Nisqually tribe. We have tried to get tribe artifacts for the museum. Not too successful with that. We have one item that came from Lakewood, which is a hand axe that is anywhere from 10 to 14,000 years old, that was found close to American Lake. And that's the only artifact that we have that we know is from right here. However, there have been all kinds of things found in the area. Art Hutlaw's house, which is on 75th and Chambers Creek, which Helen McGovern owned at one time. There was an Indian camp found there on the shore underneath the house that dated from 7,500 years ago. Those artifacts went to the Burke Museum, and that's the last we hear of them. They're indicated in some old news articles now, but I don't know how to get any kind of inventory from the Burke Museum as to what they even got from Lakewood, from Mike Avey. So those are things that I would like to work on, however, haven't gotten anywhere so far.
Thanks. The other thing was, we just had our 25th anniversary party. And as a part of that, there is being assembled a time capsule. And is the board have any, did you get anything contributed to the time capsule, or do you have any observations about what is in the time capsule?
Could I ask, what is it, the time capsule here at City Hall?
No, it's the one that's being assembled.
Oh,
That is.
okay, but what are the ground rules?
Just being assembled now to be
What are the
revealed
ground
at the
rules?
50th anniversary, I guess.
Yeah, we haven't been asked. I don't know that the Historical Society's been asked, but
Okay, well, okay, well, I do not know if that time capsule's contents are finalized yet. So I think that you may want to get Ms. Brunel to get in touch with, I think Parks and Recreation is maybe have the lead on that and see if there is anything going that way.
Might be a good item for the work plan this year. I think to coordinate, or at least maybe have staff reach out and provide.
Well,
some
before it gets
feedback.
sealed up and goes in the ground, yeah. And then I need, there's just some help that I need, okay? The historic road signs, people in the public have been very complimentary, particularly of the ones of where that, like on Stelicum Boulevard or Hipkins and that, and the sign says historic name, and it adds something to it. However, quite a few people conversely have commented on the Bridgeport Way signs. The Bridgeport Way brown and white signs, they know don't say historic name. That there are numerous now posts up and down Bridgeport Way that have a green and white sign that says Bridgeport Way and a brown and white sign that says Bridgeport Way. And many people think that that just looks cluttered. To some extent, I agree with them when I look at those that way. But they asked me, why did we do that? And I don't have an answer, and I need to know what to tell folks that are trying to see why doing that particular road in that way is a significant benefit to the community.
it just was that the Bridgeport Way, as far as we know, is the historic name. However, we don't need to really be redundant with the same names. We tried to get this thing done and find as many as we could. However, Gary Reese had a pamphlet on the historic names in Pierce County. And that's the basis of many of those historic names, because there isn't much written on history of roads. You can go back to early maps and that's covered, like the Bird Mill Road ran all the way out toward Puyallup. as well as Military Road going all the way down to Fort Vancouver, I would assume, because it's kind of off the map that we see. But, and then there's another military road which goes up to Fort Bellingham.
I think the point is to avoid unnecessary duplication.
Yeah, I guess, and I guess, that folks feel informed and educated when there's a sign that says historic name and it's different than the name that's there. And I guess I understand that Bridgeport Way has been the name of a road for a long time. But perhaps as you're getting into the second iteration about looking to that, really decide whether those signs are having the impact that a historic, designating historic roads that we would want to have. Because it's not really understood why the same name is there twice. And as you're going through the second iteration of it, then maybe you could also reconsider what to do with the Bridgeport Way signs to do that, and whether there is, or at least in your, as we do our communication strategy, indicate the great significance that caused that to do that. And maybe there's a recommendation that maybe the green and white signs are the ones that come out.
Isn't one sign brown and one sign is green?
Yeah, and
So
they're on the
that's-
same pole, like
But
6 inches
that's-
away from each
So
other.
that's the differentiation, is that the brown signs historically, I guess, throughout the whole United States. So if it's a brown sign, it's like a historic marker, or, something with some sort of relevance that way. And then the green street sign is your regular street sign. So I'm not quite sure what else you would do to make that differentiation.
Well,
Besides doing some sort of educational pieces on maybe
Yeah,
the
yeah.
different streets and
Yeah.
the historic streets.
I do think that most people, historic street or historic road, means it used to be something else. And now it's something, and so that's not well understood, having it be the same. But,
Anything else on that? Because we want to move it along. I think we got the point.
Well, I might
I'm-
comment on one thing.
Yeah.
Bridgeport Way was probably named once the Narrows Bridge came into existence,
Okay.
because that was the connection to the Narrows Bridge. But that's only 1940. So that may not have even been a road earlier, or at least much of a road,
Mhm.
but we can research that.
Great. Anything else, council members or members of the LHAB board? Well, I want to thank you very much, and I take away a couple of things. We need to identify a youth council member for you. Who's our liaison? Is that you, Paul, on the youth council? So we can take a look at that for you. And then on your quest for new member recruitment, I would point out that we had an opportunity this weekend, I assume, at the Lakewood History Museum to talk to people about the vibrancy of Lakewood history, and any opportunity for a sign-up sheet. If you are interested in the history of Lakewood and would like to be involved, please sign up to potentially be an LHAB member. So my point is, whether you guys did that or not, there's never a dull moment, and we should always consider an opportunity.
Yeah, our major thrust during that event was finding docents to keep the museum
I get
open
ya,
more
yeah.
and more days
Yeah.
than it is now.
It looked great, by the way, so thank you for doing that this weekend. Well, other than that, thank you very much. Mr. Copfield.
Deputy Mayor, just real quick, the budget allocation for the historic preservation consultant is $4,000 per year, or $8,000 for the biennium.
That's what I thought was pretty close. Okay. And that is outside of any other monies they had for street signage or other endeavors?
Affirmative.
Okay. Very good. Well, we spent some time with you because we believe what you do is important. Thank you for your volunteerism and input to our fair city. Thank you, Christina, for showing up on Zoom. We appreciate it and appreciate your willingness to participate and get involved. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, next we have a review of the 2022 Human Services Funding Recommendations. And I believe we have Sarah Yamamoto as the advisory board chair to assist us. So I'll give you guys a chance to get set.
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Whalen, council members. I'm joined this evening by Brian Humphreys, Human Services, and thank you. I believe some people may be joining on Zoom from our board, but I will let them introduce themselves if they arrive. I'm here to present 2 recommendations from the Community Services Advisory Board and answer any questions you might have. Our first recommendation will be about the allocation process for 2022 human services dollars from the city's general fund. And the second is a recommendation about how this advisory board might help you determine how to best invest American Rescue Plan Act stimulus dollars if you do decide to allocate 1% for human services needs. So first, in June, we recommended staying with our existing contractors for 2022 on the condition they pass their site visits and are on pace to achieve their contract goals. Attachment B in the materials provided shows the results of the site visits and the second quarter contract outputs. Only 2 organizations have not met that goal. Those are Making a Difference Foundation and the Asia Pacific Cultural Center. As described in the memo included in your packet, the board believes both of those organizations are doing the work as contracted, but have not submitted invoices and reports because of a lack of administrative capacity. Therefore, our recommendation includes offering 2022 contracts to those organizations on the condition they submit all their paperwork by November 8th when we have our joint session with you. At that time, if either of them have not met their contract requirements, we will make a recommendation for how to reallocate those funds. Also described in the memo is how we recommend allocating the additional $10,000 of funding in 2022. The issue of youth mental health keeps coming up as one of the biggest needs, and we see the emotional programming for youth category as your primary investment in that area. Therefore, we recommend dividing the $10,000 equally among each of the 4 youth contractors for a $2,500 increase in funding for those in good standing. Those are Boys and Girls Club, Communities in Schools, YMCA, and Oasis Center. Our full recommendation for 2022 human services funding is reflected in attachment A. And before we move on to our second recommendation, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Council. Any questions? Again, we're looking at attachment A on the first funding recommendation. Proceed.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the second recommendation for allocating the 1% of ARPA Human Services funding, Lakewood's Promise and the community collaboration have continued to monitor the needs in the community throughout the pandemic. The 2 primary concerns remain youth mental health and affordable housing. Affordable housing is obviously a tremendous issue for many Lakewood residents, and the Human Services contribution to that need has been to develop a workforce development strategy to increase wages so that families can afford housing. As of last month, that initiative is now being led by Career Team and has been branded as Lakewood Thrives. There are some great initiatives to address youth mental health, and Human Services has been working to facilitate collaboration among all the partners. The school district is investing in an initiative called Give 6. Lakewood's Choice offers behavioral and mental health services in the schools. The Youth Council is developing its work plan for the year with an emphasis on youth mental health, and the Warriors of Change alumni continue to meet and discuss how to serve Lakewood. There is more investigation to be done to figure out where to invest youth mental health funding, but that is clearly an area of need. Therefore, our recommendation is to allocate half of the 1% toward the Lakewood Thrives initiative and half toward a youth mental health initiative. And we will make a more specific recommendation for youth mental health at our joint session with you on November 8th. Be happy to answer any questions you have about the second recommendation. But I just want to thank the council for your continuing commitment to provide funding for Lakewood's critical social services organizations. This is a complex time, and these organizations are doing excellent work to meet needs in our community.
Absolutely. Ms. Moss had a question, and then Mr. Boki.
Thank you. Thank you for the report too. I'm just curious as to how well the students are taking advantage of the mental health programs. Do you have that information?
No, we don't have a lot of data about how much we're taking advantage of those right now. The only one I know about is the Lakewood Choice, and I don't have a lot of their most recent reports haven't been submitted, but I do know they've been well attended.
They have, okay, great, because I know that was a major concern for the students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boki.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't know about Career Team or Lakewood Thrives. Can you give us a little more information on that?
Yeah, that Lakewood Thrives is the culmination of essentially a 2-year process Lakewood Promise has gone through to first identify with all the partners in the community, with the community collaboration, what are the biggest needs in the community? Based on those needs, what are the gaps in service? Based on the gaps in service, who in Lakewood can meet that need, and if not Lakewood, who can we bring in? So that took about a year to get everyone to identify those needs as mental health and affordable housing. We identified workforce development, getting wages up as our contribution to the affordable housing crisis. We reviewed all the partners we can find who do anything related to workforce development, getting wages up with the lens of high impact work. So we really said, what is a living wage in Lakewood? Who is helping Lakewood residents attain living wages? There is not a workforce development partner who has that particular goal, but we do have Pierce College and Global Park, which have some excellent programs that are leading to living wages. And they are both in Lakewood Promise Advisory Board. So that initiative started with us partnering with the youth organization and the colleges to say, help us understand what these jobs are, and we'll work with the youth organizations to get actionable information down to the community level. And that's what we've been trying to do for the past year in a pandemic. That's why we were doing the Lakewood Promise events in the parks and Springbrook and Philip over the summer. Information. It's more capacity than human services has. Growing, the demand is growing. We just needed a partner. Career Team is one of the Workforce Central WorkSource Systems subcontractors. They understand communication relationship based initiatives better than most. They have something they already do, not in Lakewood, Career Boosts, which is the same idea. They work directly with employers to identify living wage jobs, and they work with the colleges to identify programs for those jobs, and they do events in the community that are sector specific. So we brought them into Lakewood Promise and the community collaboration almost a year ago and said, look what they're doing, let's bring it to Lakewood. At the same time, they had some funding that was allowed to be expanded into Lakewood. So they've been serving alongside us for this past year. And so we ended up using some of Lakewood Promise funding to have them take over the workforce development off my plate and then grow it. And that their involvement, their leadership started in August.
So at the end of the day, what's the, what do we get?
Well, we get much more actionable information, raise awareness. And then some collaborative effort to align to this.
Okay. Okay. So do we get more individuals into these programs?
Yeah. We get to Pierce College and Clover Park programs that we know we live in.
Okay. Okay.
So Brian, not to be thick-headed, but so the money, the half of the 68 grand goes to which entity, which 501c3?
It has to go to Career Team to do more career boosts.
Okay.
And in particular, invest in capacity for business specialists.
Got it.
One of the employer navigators does more than go find where the jobs are around.
So does that money go into Workforce Central and then flows down to that directly to them? Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. Very good. That helps. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, folks? Anything else on the recommendations?
No, that sums up what the board's been discussing. Appreciate you
Well,
listening.
we appreciate the work because we know it's significant. And you guys have a heart and a passion for having an ear to the community's needs. We appreciate that. We need that. We value that. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Council.
Thank you.
Be November 8th.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have a review of our tree preservation code. And for this, we have Assistant City Manager, Mr. Buer. Going once. He's on the screen. Mr. Buer, welcome to the party. Do you have to press the button, allow to talk there? Oh, he has to accept it. I got it. Okay. I'm a neophyte on this whole Zoom thing. So it's only been 18 months. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a troglodyte in many ways. In many ways.
$2 word.
I
Yeah.
know, I got it. I'm so proud.
Well, I've had to do depositions via Zoom and the sharing screen and the controlling documents. That's been crazy.
Oh, there he is. He's just coming on down.
He kind of like levitates. He kind of levitates, you know, and it's almost like Star Trek. You kind of press a button and there he shows up. Yeah.
Look at him, he's running. Don't trip.
Wow. And all we were hoping for was something on Zoom, but no, he manifests in person.
Live and in
Yeah.
person.
Yay. Yeah.
I'm barely alive, but yes.
Mr. Buer, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll just begin by saying this report comes to you by way of your request through the city manager. You've been provided 4 documents. One is a memo, which sort of gives a quick briefing of what's in the document. And the second document is a fairly detailed review of the code. And it kind of, on one side, shows what the code says, and on the other side, how it's administered. It also gives you an idea of what works, and sometimes where we have questions ourselves, but it gives you a very, I think, a clear, informative view of administration. The third is a verbatim copy of Title 18A70, Article 3, which is the exact code itself. And the last thing is the PowerPoint presentation, which is where I'm going to focus my comments this evening. So the first slide. Okay. Some starting points. In preparing this report, one of the things that I found out is that tree ordinances are highly individualistic, and they represent oftentimes certain community values or needs. And so when you go down this process, you're going to find very specific questions and comments from this community about tree ordinances. They are a challenging assignment, and I equate this very similarly to updating the sign code. You're going to get a lot of questions and comments about private property rights. So I'm letting the council know to expect significant public comment, which is fine. If we're serious about doing this, it's going to modify the department's work plan, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Requiring balancing of often competing interests of environmental protection, private property rights, and economic development. This is the part that's often the most difficult and can be challenging. And the last piece is it takes time. It requires broad community support and a patient, thorough approach. And
Doing my research on this, one of the comments I received or read was it's often quite a frequent occurrence on tree ordinances that you'll be moving down the path and everything's going fine. And you're getting close to the end and all of a sudden there's a new group of people that want to comment and talk about your sign code, or excuse me, your tree code. So you have to take that into account if you're going to do this in a thorough approach. Next slide. Now, the one comment here, it's more than just a tree preservation code and it can get complicated. And I often use this slide to show that when you're looking at tree preservation, you're also talking about the State Environmental Policy Act, the city's critical areas ordinance, Title 14, and more specifically, our flood control regulations, because you're considered to be in a critical area if you run the 100-year flood. And in 2017, the federal government changed the 100-year floodplain. And so a substantial more land is in the floodplain than it was before. And this is not shown in all of the mapping documents that are available for the city's review. So you have to do quite a bit of research sometimes before you can figure it out. The city's shoreline master program, which covers our lakes and streams, written guidelines by state agencies. My understanding that some of those guidelines are under review right now, and so that may affect any future tree regulation. And mapping tools also provided by state agencies, and I already mentioned the fact that some of that data is not always working the way it should. We use basically 4 or 5 different mapping systems in order to often address where we have significant tree issues. And then how did we go about analyzing the current code? And if we go to the next slide, this is sort of self-evident. It looks like this. I summarized the tree code on the left and then provide staff comments on the right. So you can go through each section and see for yourself how it reads and how it works and so forth. Next slide. Several preliminary themes identified. First was a blueprint, which is really about public participation, which I'll get into in a minute. Second is there's two categories of initial staff recommendations. Some are quite easy and can be accomplished, I think, quickly. I think most people would agree with. Others not so easy. And then I also wanted to bring back some policy considerations for the council, basically asking some questions and getting some direction from the council, making sure that we're on the right path. Next slide. I think this is probably one of the more important points, developing a blueprint for public participation. Council reviews and adopts a public participation plan. It describes the city's strategies and techniques to inform and engage the public. It basically has 5 elements. It sets the stage for clear purpose, defines structure and process, establishes commitment among stakeholders to the process, and provides inclusive and effective representation. And this is something that we're not good at internally. And that's not because we don't try. It's our efforts are oftentimes more on just doing the basics of current planning and long-range planning. And on special projects like this, this is something where you probably want to hire a third-party person to come in and help. City manager and I already talked about that, and I think he would agree that's probably a better approach. One of the things with public participation is the person or firm will go out and do the work. We'll come back and tell you exactly what all the comments are. And then from there, you go ahead and develop the draft code. That's one approach to this. There are several different types of public participation processes. And, that's something that the council can provide direction on if this wishes to pursue this some further. Next slide. The easy recommendations. Revising the purpose section. We need to have some better descriptors or determinants on what constitutes emergency removal. Delete the term sensitive because it's not defined anywhere in the code, and just call it critical areas. Review tree preservation standards for subdivisions. And why this is in here is we provide lots and lots of exemptions for R1, R2, R3, R4. And that's where you see most of your subdivisions. And so we probably think we need to go back and take a look at that. And then add a new tree preservation definition section, although expect significant dialogue on what types of trees are defined. And so this is when you get into historic trees, Gary oaks, and all these other different varieties. And some cities go to great extent to define all of them. And then other cities just lump them all together as landmark trees. So those are approaches that we need to discuss with the public. Next slide. More challenging thoughts. Deleting the 17,000 square foot lot exemption and require a tree removal permit for all significant trees as they would be defined in the revised code. That section's been around since 2001 and was hotly debated at the time. And it was the recommendation of Doug Richardson. I remember it to this date because of the amount of comment that was received on this. But that's how the 17,000 square feet came about. In the definition of significant tree to not include invasive or non-native or exotic trees. I think that may solve some problems because let's just work on the trees that are specific to the region. If necessary, and this is important because I don't think we just amend the tree preservation code, but we really do need to go back and look at our comprehensive plan policies as well as Title 14 and do this as a package. Right. And then incorporate new climate change standards into the proposed regulations. And then I just wanted to point out that items 1, 2, and 4 have fiscal impact on the department's administration and operations. We'll be spending more time on trees. Next slide. This is where we get into some specific questions for council. Does the city require a fee for all tree removal permits? Because right now the fee is $0. Is it to be a full cost recovery or is the city subsidizing this function? And if so, to what extent? How does the city address heritage trees, landmark trees, historic trees, or protected trees? Each one of those have separate definitions. Are Gary oak trees to be called out separately from protection and preservation? For those persons who remove trees without permits, does the city continue with the current policy allowing for retroactive permitting, or does the city move forward with a more aggressive approach? And right now, we're pretty reasonable. If you take down a tree without permission and we catch you, we inform you of the situation and give you the option of fixing it without having to do fines and penalties. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but it gives property owners an option. Next slide. And this one, as I was writing this up, it occurred to me as I was looking at maps, we have Gary oaks all over the area. And they're predominantly found in Pierce and Thurston County. And while the effort here is being talked about in Lakewood because of increased urbanization, is this something that the city council wants to address on a more regional basis and talk to the counties and other cities? Because there are significant number of trees in Parkland, Spanaway, DuPont, Lacey, and in Thurston County. I'm not expecting you to give me an answer on that, but if we're going to look at this, let's look at the big picture, just not Lakewood. Next slide. This is just for my edification. We've talked about Gary oaks, but as part of the climate change update or adoption by the council, you also talked about amending the tree preservation code to address climate change and carbon sequestration. So I expect that if we're going to do this, this is really about updating the code, but also including these elements into that update and doing it all at once. But I'm just wanting to affirm that that's what the council wants us to do. Next slide. Increasing tree regulation requirements increases the amount of bureaucratic specificity. If this direction is sought, it is likely going to frustrate some property owners. Once adopted, an outreach program is strongly recommended. And then I have a little subparagraph down below about kludges. A kludge is actually a computer software term where you're working on code and you're working along and you solved everything, but you got this one little issue. So you go back and do a temporary fix and then you forget about it. And then after a while, you have all these temporary fixes and now it doesn't work at all. I would ask that when we go through this kind of stuff, we be very directive and thoughtful in our policy direction, because I've seen this in my career. Kludges can actually create more problems. And then the next steps is to develop a public participation plan. And then the last slide is any questions the council may have.
I've got several, but I'll turn it over to the group first. Ms. Moss?
Just briefly, have we reached out to the other cities in regards to the Gary Oaks? Oh, and do you know which area has the majority of them?
There's been no outreach to Thurston or Pierce County. A majority of the oaks, as I can recall from looking at the maps, are found actually in Thurston County and unincorporated areas. A significant number of trees are found in Parkland and Spanaway. Large number of trees are found in JBLM, but they have their own preservation program already, so I did not include them. Lakewood does have, if you take a look at the Sound Initiative mapping system, does have a significant number of trees that have been identified. So Lakewood does seem to be a bit of a hot spot, but there are other parts, and also Lacey. Lacey has a considerable number of oak trees. So that's what I recall. And again, we've not done any outreach to those other cities or counties.
Thank you.
Ms. Farmer and then Mr. Branstad.
So what's special about a Gary Oak? Is it protected at some level?
It is not an endangered species. It's not a listed species. It's, I would call it a tree of interest by Department of Ecology because it has a limited range. Most of Gary Oaks are found in British Columbia along the coast. Oak Harbor, and a significant number of trees are located in Pierce County and Thurston County, and the range is diminishing because of urbanization.
And how do you define a significant tree? Is that a width or a height?
It depends on how you wish to define it. I hate that sounds general, but a significant tree in Lakewood is any tree of a certain size, whether it's native or non-native. And other places basically say a significant tree is this species and of a certain size. Now, the thing to be careful of with Gary Oaks is they're often found in clumps, and they're small. They don't meet the width requirements in our code. So a good example of this is found in an apartment complex off of Steilacoom Boulevard and Lakewood Drive. There are literally thousands of oak trees, and many of them are quite small with diameters of only 1 or 2 inches. And so they don't technically meet our definition, and the director is given some discretion about including them as protected, not protected, but significant trees. Gary Oaks are unique because they tend to grow in clumps. So you want to preserve them as a group versus individual trees in general. If a good example of this is found in those vacant lands across from Clover Park Technical College. There's hundreds and hundreds of Gary Oak trees. And those lands were obtained as part of a grant the college received from the state. And then the city and the college worked together to try to preserve that area. So you have a very large, expansive piece of property with, I don't know, if you include all the little bitty ones, thousands of oak trees out there, they're doing fairly well. Just leave them alone and keep people out.
And you mentioned, if I recall correctly, that we have quite a few Gary Oaks identified, or I don't know if mapped was the term that you used. Do we have a tree inventory in Lakewood?
Yes and no. I know that sounds bad.
Sounds like government to me.
Hold on. We have an internal priority species mapping program. It's one sheet. It's not very big. It's quite old. And then we also use the Sound Oaks Initiative Mapping Program, but some places it's not up to date, and I question some of the locations. But generally, it provides good information on the historical location of Gary Oaks in Pierce County and in Lakewood. And believe it or not, we use the Department of Ecology Coastal Atlas. And that has information as well, although that information uses the old flooding maps, so that part's not totally accurate. So we use that in combination to get a general picture of where Gary Oaks are located. And you do have historic sections of Lakewood before it developed that had large numbers of Gary Oaks. There's no question about that.
Thank you.
Can I ask an anecdotal question real quick and I'll let you go? So here's, under the current code, hypothetically, there's a property, let's just say on Meadow Road, and it's a little house for sale, it's got a deep lot, but it's riddled with these Gary Oaks. I mean, it's riddled to the point where you can't walk a foot in diameter without stepping on acorns everywhere. Under the code, this homeowner might want to add an ADU to its property. To do that would require, on this less than 17,000 square foot residential lot, the removal of any number of trees to accommodate that garage or ADU. How does the department react under the current code to that application?
Given the information that you've given me, we would review it in terms of the Sound Oaks Initiative mapping to see if it's within that range. We may go ahead and require them to do a survey of the trees, given the fact that there's so many Gary Oaks on the property. But generally speaking, in that particular situation, we would allow the removal of the trees to build the addition, but try to keep the trees along the edges to the property or elsewhere located on site. Now, this gets into the whole question that this is lots less than 17,000 square feet, but it's not sacrosanct. If you're within that mapping program that identifies you as a large number of Gary Oaks, we're going to take a serious look at this. And the effort is going to be made to try to preserve those trees, excepting for where the structure is going to be built.
Okay, so again, that's just hypothetical. So the homeowner says, okay, what if these are fir trees? What's the difference then? Because you've told us that Gary Oaks don't have a particular status per se at the state level.
Yes, they do, but they are not endangered and they're not threatened. And there's a third category that Fish and Game uses for Gary Oaks,
okay,
because of their limited range. So that's where we bring this into question. And that's one of the big issues right now we're having with the project. And
right. What's that third category? Just so
I can't think of the name off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
No problem. Dave's discretionary category.
Yeah, I can give you the name of it when I get back to.
Got it.
I'll share it with John later.
But that is one of those scenarios one could see happening. So then maybe that's where the department director exercises discretion and maybe has to adjust the side yard setbacks or whatever to make it happen, to work, the deal.
And that I'm fine with doing that, but right now I don't have the discretion to amend to approve a minor amendment to the setbacks. Right now, they have to go through a variance process, which would be a pain.
That may be something to think about as we go through this process.
Yes.
Because you see that throughout the city in certain areas where any sort of development that's currently allowed under our residential code, including cottage housing, ADU development, all that sort of stuff is going to have some impact. And unless we have some flexibility for the department director to deal with these issues, assuming we go down the path of doing the right thing with code amendments, it creates more bureaucratic.
Exactly. I mean, in my particular house, I've got 3 fir trees that are over 100 feet tall. I also have 3 Gary oaks adjacent to those fir trees. And right now, the fir trees are killing the Gary oak.
Right.
So, at some point in time, it's going to be necessary for me to probably remove the Gary oak. Am I within the range of this area that I keep talking about? No. Am I in the floodplain? No.
Right.
The other issue that you're going to find out a lot in Lakewood, sometimes these trees are on property lines.
Right.
So who owns the trees?
Mhm.
And so that becomes an issue as well. So this can get pretty complicated very quickly. Definitely discretion is necessary when we're talking about this kind of stuff, to be fair.
I'll turn it over to Mr. Brandstetter for a question, and then I'll go back to you for your ask of us for further policy direction as we get this thing moving in the direction to further public process. Mr. Brandstetter.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Mr. Buer is right in his introduction that our tree preservation ordinance and all of them are very community individualistic. That's because tree preservation ordinances are not necessarily driven by science, they're driven by emotion. In our case, we have heard a great deal of comments around Gary oaks. And Gary oaks are not one of the categories that Mr. Buer identified, but they're a tree of affection. People really like Gary oaks when they see them and where they are. I have one in my yard that is, I like it a lot. To be able to go and do that. But in terms of really scientifically being endangered or threatened or at risk, there's 90 species of oaks in the United States, and they're categorized into those 4 things that goes down. And Gary oaks are one of the species that's down at the very bottom with its coded least concern, because that although their range is limited, and all species of trees tend to have limited ranges, they're not really a risk of going extinct. Okay. That being said, they're important to people in Lakewood. We have in our community surveys historically, one of the top things mentioned by residents of ours is our environment, and that includes our tree canopy and our lakes and things to do that. And that's what people value about our community. And so I think that we as a council have some obligation to hear that and to be taking things to be able to do that, certainly to preserve the tree canopy.
If I can interject.
I think that one of the things that
we need to make sure that you're close to the microphone, not only so that people can hear you, but that we can pick it up on the recorder. I'm sorry. I thought I hit a pause there.
Okay, so of Mr. Buer's thoughts about things that we have to do, I have just several thoughts. One is of the things that he is.
Like you almost have to like.
Okay, is I do think that the review with respect to tree preservation of the subdivision ordinance is probably something that we significantly need to move forward with soon. And he seemed to indicate that that was on his list of things that could be done soon. And the reason for that is that although we have heard a lot of public comment about trees being lost for warehouses and commercial development. The reality is we have, most of the tree canopy that we have lost in the last 10 years has been lost to development related to housing. You know, much of the commercial development was done on lands where there weren't a lot of trees to start with, although there are some pending that have some do that. But there have been a significant number of subdivisions, particularly in the R2 and R3 zones, that have resulted in areas being clear cut of significant tree canopy of trees of all types. And that directly relates to that 17,000. You go from 5 acres to a lot of little 17,000 postage stamp parcels. And the rules just change overnight. And I think that's where we need to look at that. If a parcel is subject to the tree code now, if it's subdivided, it shouldn't just disappear from being applied to the tree code. There's got to be some way for there to be a transition about subdivisions to do that. And we tried to do that back when we were working with the rezone of the property on Veterans Drive and Gravelly Lake, the so-called Barker property. And we thought that we would be able to satisfy the public concern about the streetscape along Gravelly Lake Drive remaining green. And that could be accomplished through the use of the Plan Development District process. And it didn't work. The hearing examiner didn't do things that preserved the streetscape along Gravelly Lake Drive, and we ended up with a fence. Okay. So my last comment is, I think Mr. Buer is very right about public participation being extremely important, and that it's going to be a lengthy process to do everything. There's some low-hanging fruit we can do. There's a process that we haven't used very often, but I think that we don't necessarily want to pile this on to the Planning Commission, because that we don't form the Planning Commission with the range of expertise needed to deal with this. And that we do have some history of assembling ad hoc public committees to work on things to do that can meet repeatedly, have a mix of experts with them, but can be the folks that reach out to the public. And the two examples that I can think of, the most successful example is how we have done our parks legacy plans, where we've gone and gathered essentially an ad hoc public committee of people that we felt all had something to contribute. They met for however long it took to come up with that. And we have really good, sound legacy plan that has served our development of our parks over years well. The other example is one that I have some personal experience with, is that went back in the early 2000s, there was a public desire to kick Puget Sound Energy out of town. And there was an ad hoc citizens committee that was put together by the council to study, was that a good idea? What would it done? And it met, and I was a member of that committee, and met for 7 months and really looked at all of the different things, so scientific and impacts and causes to do that. And it became a really good public participation process that may serve well for this topic, you make sure you've got development people and artillery people and arborists and citizens with passion and others, but who agree to all sit down as a group and work through all the things. So, and they can be coached by a consultant. So, I would take Mr. Buer's feeling that we really need a significant participation plan, but I would suggest looking at that model.
So, thank you, Mr. Boki.
Thank you. So Dave, thank you very much. I think you did a really good job with the presentation and the information that you put in our packets, and we have additional information beyond the PowerPoint. And I think you did a good job of kind of trying to explain all the little nuances of a tree retention ordinance. A couple of things, because when I go look at different retention ordinances, they really are all different. I mean, the 3 or 4 that I've looked at are just completely, so clearly there's no model. And usually in local government, there's models with things that other people use. So, but I will, from my standpoint, make it easier on you. You have under more challenging staff recommendations, number 2, amend the definition of significant tree to not include invasive or non-native species. And I would absolutely do that. They may have a beautiful, huge palm tree in their yard, but it's a palm tree. It really doesn't belong in our environment. When I walk in Fort Steilacoom Park, I see what I believe are tons of non-native trees that have left there and propagated. I know on the Western State campus, there are a lot of non-native trees that are propagated and growing. And so that, and I really just don't think it's good. It's not good. It's not something we should encourage. And in fact, we should encourage that people get rid of their non-native trees and non-native plants. So then I'd also like us to consider a market, what I would call a market solution to when we do these fines and various things like that, and we do some tree plantings, that I think and I know there's people who have planted trees in the game farm. I know that there are folks who have planted trees by Pierce College. I walk through Fort Steilacoom Park. I see a lot of non-native trees that I think could be cut down and replaced with several Gary oaks, probably, and maybe even talk to Western State on their plan about, hey, you've got non-native species here. Clearly, the state of Washington doesn't want the propagation of non-native species. I'm sure the governor would appreciate that. He's a big-time environmentalist. And that we look at replacing those trees with several, because they don't all live if you've planted smaller trees, although the game farm, they've been very successful. So I'd like to think in terms of something like that. I also think that we do need to look at maybe some preservation of some areas in neighborhoods that probably need more open space where we're willing to plant or preserve trees. One thing I don't understand is if are other cities using tree preservation ordinances as a way to make sure that they dampen down the ability to produce more housing? And is that a way that you're allowed to do it without saying that's what you're trying to do?
Yeah.
And if the state legislature pushes forward with statewide zoning, what I call statewide zoning, which basically what they've done in California now, which you can build quadplexes on anywhere. Should we wait till then and then use the tree retention ordinance as a way to defeat that in a way, which I think other cities will do, right? Other cities, would guess that Gig Harbor will be very good at a tree preservation ordinance to make sure that they can defeat that. So that's a policy question for us. But I just wanted to make sure that the non-native, invasive or non-native, I think we should actually encourage that. If it's a non-native tree, I would say don't charge for the permit. I think in other cases, if we have to send people out, we should charge something for the permit, right? Because if it's our staff time to go out there and look at the property, we should be getting paid for that work. Certainly, if it's someone who wants to build, I mean, they're paying everybody else to do everything. We should certainly charge for the permit. But if it's a non-native, we should actually be, or invasive species, we should probably be encouraging that they cut them out. So that's my 2 cents, or a little more than 2 cents with it. Thank you very much for that.
Ms. Farmer?
I think I'm interested in more information before I would get behind the differentiation between native and non-native. There are a lot of folks here who just like tree cover and canopy and lakes in our environment. And so, and if I was a property owner and I just happen to have all sorts of native species on my land and my permit fee was, $500 or $1,000 to take the tree down, and my neighbor happened to have a bunch of non-natives and he didn't have to pay anything to take his down, I would be kind of ticked. So I would be interested in some more information before we made a decision.
If I can briefly answer that question, there are some tree codes that say native, and this is a list, but also allow for non-native trees, but they have a specific list of what those trees are.
Mhm.
That's one way of looking at that issue.
Yeah, that's interesting. I am curious about a process moving forward and the possibility of bringing in a consultant. And I'm not clear if our planning commission was planning on relying on a consultant or how.
We really
I'm intrigued
haven't,
by the idea, but
we really haven't spoken to the planning commission about the use of a consultant. That came up with this report. But I will also tell you the Parks Board is extremely interested in this subject as well. And they've asked for a presentation at the earliest meeting to talk about what we talked about here tonight, but they definitely wish to be a part of it. I've already received several requests from public to be a part of any future stakeholder meeting. So there's a lot of excitement about this. And of course, no decisions have been made, but you will get a large group of volunteers if you choose to go in that direction. As far as the public participation plan, if that's something the council wants to do, I would actually bring back an outline of what that would look like. And so before we send it out as a proposal, the council could take a look at it and make sure you're comfortable with it, and then move that forward and go through a formal process.
I've seen this done well in other situations, particularly as Councilmember Branstetter pointed out, with an ad hoc committee with a group of interested citizens who have some expertise in their own right, and in addition to their passion. And so that'd be great. Thank you.
Mr. Branstetter?
Let me just comment on one thing, is that I definitely think that as we get to the beginning of the year and we adjust our fee schedule, that is the opportunity to put a cost on a tree permit, and a cost, regardless of what level of cost recovery it will generate, does also get us out of the piece of we have a policy that if you do something without a permit, you can get the permit, but it costs you twice what it originally costs. But a no-cost permit is like creates a situation to where might as well not get the permit and not do it, because if you get caught, it isn't a problem. So I think that can be done when we approve the next fee schedule as we do in each budget cycle.
Before I send it back to Mr. Buer, any thoughts or consensus on making a recommendation on changing the fee schedule to provide for some sort of permit fee with the failure to obtain one having a enhanced sort of penalty to incentivize people to actually get a permit?
I would like to ask, I mean, there's almost nothing we don't charge for when it comes to permits. So I'm interested in the history, and fortunately we have you around you've been here with your wisdom for a long time. And what do you remember why a decision was made that they wouldn't charge
I
for
think
it?
the reason, well, keep in mind, it was 1996 is when we became a city. We adopted a comprehensive plan in 2000. It was a bit controversial at the time.
Mhm.
And then we were behind on developing a new zoning code. And so we got dinged by the state for taking 5 years versus 4 years. And I really think at that time, because it's the fact that you had a brand new city and brand new processes and procedures, I think the council was very, at that time, and probably still to this day, is very conscientious about fees and the impact of a new city would have on new fees, because there's never been a requirement from what I can recall, the tree removal permit in Pierce County charging anything for it. So I think the council at that time was being very, very cautious about not overstepping itself. And so that's why I think that no fee was required. That's just my recollection. I will tell you that if you look at Bellevue, they went through a brand new tree preservation code in 2015, and it took a long time to go through. And at the very end, as I recall, they did go ahead and have a no fee for certain size single family lots. And so that's where you're going to find your discussion is going to be on. And if you take a careful look at this code, single family zones get treated differently than everybody else. And so,
We're
that's
trying to incentivize at the time, right?
Yeah. And so I think as we go through and you're looking at these revisions, I think that's going to change. Another one that's just very recent, which was adopted in August, was the City of Covington Tree Code. You might want to take a look at that. That has a lot of really interesting little pieces to it. And, I use quite a bit of information from that process in developing this report. So, and because it's so brand new, and Covington, like Lakewood, a fairly new city.
So in summary, taking your recommendations and what I've heard from the council, it sounds like we're fine with giving consensus to the city manager to address or create a public participation plan that might have facilitation by a professional consultant and a budget line item for that, obviously. Okay. And I think we can discuss down the road, maybe whatever permit adjustments might need to be made as we do the annual permit review.
The other thing that I would say, that I'm not giving any specific dates, but I get the impression that council would like us to move expeditiously on this.
Well, and let me ask you in that, there had been some chatter about moratoria, which we're not inclined to do, or interim regulations, which I haven't heard, a groundswell of support. Given what you know, what's in the pipeline, right? There isn't a plethora of subdivisions that are subject to permitting at this stage. The ones that are in the pipeline have vested. Right?
Yes, yes.
So we're not going to create, more consternation or lack by doing some sort of interim regulatory process.
And when I speak of subdivisions, I'm really speaking of long plats.
Not the short plats,
Not short
which are
plats.
9 or less. Right?
9 or less. And short plats, if they're 9 or less and they're greater than 17,000 square feet, minus these exclusions that I've talked about,
Right.
you're still subject to getting a tree removal permit.
Mm-hmm.
You're not given carte blanche. Another example is the Habitat for Humanity project. That's not zoned single family, but MR2. So they are subject to tree removal, but that's a tree removal permit. A subdivision by itself is not cutting down a tree.
So
In
the
most
MR2
cases, it's the bigger subdivisions I'm more concerned with.
So in an MR2 project like the Habitat project, what impact does the department have with regard to the site plan approval process?
Habitat's a good partner to work with. We've already decided that we're going to try to save as many trees as possible.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you. We very much appreciate the update and the report and the outline, and I think we've given the guidance you need. Very good. Thanks, Mr. Bjork.
Thank you.
You may now go back to from whence you came, whether it was some Zoom apparatus or otherwise. Okay, we now have the review of the City Council Rules of Procedure and City Council virtual meetings. I think we're calling on council members Moss and Farmer for this, it looks like. And I think we've got our city attorney in the wings for any assistance and clarification, but I'll turn it over to you,
Okay.
Councilmember Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. One of the things we wanted to talk about was the procedures for virtual. We don't have a process for the virtual meetings. And I had a conversation earlier with Ms. Schumacher, and we were thinking about toggling like in-house signers and then going out, but that would be very cumbersome and time consuming. So we were looking at how can we make it convenient and as the same for the people that sign in here at 7 o'clock and the people that log on at 7 o'clock instead of having to have them wait the whole process. So the suggestion, if we can come up with that conclusion, unless someone has something different, can we alternate the weeks? That 1 week we have in-house first, and the next public comment session, we have it go for the call-ins first. If that would be something that would cover the policy so that we would, at least we'd have something similar to for our virtual.
So number one, for sure, recognize that virtual public comment is adopted by our council rules, right? Our procedure. And I hear you're saying to provide some more inclusivity, we would perhaps alternate virtual, in-house, virtual.
Correct. Well, like we have public comment every other week. So the 1 week we would do in-house first.
In
Then the
person.
next week we would reverse it and do the call-ins first.
Everyone would get called upon. It would just be
Yes,
an order
yes.
prioritization.
Yeah, it wouldn't be one online person and then in
No.
person.
It'd
Then
be
it
all
would-
on
it
that
would be
list versus
all or
all.
nothing. We would just do the in person first 1 week. And then the next time we would start with all the Zoom folks. I personally don't know if that is as important as just updating section 3.5 of our council procedures to make sure that it addresses virtual comment at all, because the procedures talk about how you stand and you sign a physical form and then you wait to be recognized and you move to the podium, and it has nothing to do with this council operating in a hybrid environment where we have people waiting in an online environment.
I just think that if we let our virtual people understand that that we are going to alternate weeks, will help them to understand that we're not going to have them wait from 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock before they have a chance to speak, even though they've signed on at 7 o'clock.
Thank you. Anything else, Ms. Moss, that you had on your agenda for tonight on this topic?
I was just going to say, if I have the general idea, I'll come back to you with a draft. We do not have to wordsmith this evening.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're just talking general ideas right now. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other thoughts, Ms. Moss, real quick?
That was all I had on the virtual.
Ms. Farmer, and then Mr. Boki, and then do you have something?
So we had 3 items that we wanted to bring up, and I want to make sure that, is it okay if
Sure.
we talk about I don't know if Councilmember Boki had a comment about that item.
Let me ask Mr. something else. Do you
Yeah,
have a
with-
comment on this section, Mr.
Yeah,
Branstad?
but with respect to the public comment section.
Yes.
I would just say that, in addition to doing that, that we would need some language that spoke to how virtual commenters who were parts of a group would qualify for 10 minutes.
Okay.
So when I look at 3.5, I've got some issues. And so one is comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. And so there's no discretion at the chair. So if 100 people line up, you're here for 300 minutes. There's no discretion. I think
there's
most
discretion.
bodies give discretion to this chair to reduce the
It
time.
does say there
It
on
does say
the
that?
third to the last sentence, the mayor shall determine the overall amount of time set for public comments.
Okay, so the mayor can shut it off, but they can't the mayor cannot reduce the time per person. That's how I read
The
it.
interesting question is whether the mayor should determine the overall amount of the time set for public comments at the commencement of the meeting, as opposed to when might be tired of hearing public comment, because that would not be taken very well by the
Well,
public.
and that's the way it reads, right? After 2 hours, you just say, we're done for tonight, come back in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
I think when you have a ton of people, you say, you get 2 minutes, you get a minute, because there's, not that that's ever happened here. The other one, but
Hearings are different, yeah.
but I'll let everyone noodle on that. The other one is the groups who have at least 3 members present at the meeting must designate a speaker who may have a total of 10 minutes to speak on behalf of the group. I don't think we've ever defined it that way, because we say, if you're here to speak on behalf of a group, you get 10 minutes. And I've never understood that, right? Because I could just make up a group, the Paul Boki Alliance to Save Children. And who's going to stop me? And then I can just roll on for 10 freaking minutes. And I guess I see the intent of that.
Mhm.
I do not see, when groups come to talk, we've usually invited them to speak. And it's either in a proclamation or something like that. I think it's a loophole. I've never really understood it. And I'm not quite sure because it doesn't prevent the other people from getting up and speaking also.
Would the body be open to having the chair at its discretion, his or her discretion, allow additional time for?
I have sufficient direction based on what Councilmember Boki has said. What I'll be doing is bringing back some options.
Great.
Yeah, I think what I'm proposing in both cases is you give the chair the ability to determine. The chair's running the meeting. You give the chair the ability to run the meeting rather than write rules around. So we have to take public comment. We agree on that. The question is as to what degree you have to take it. How can you manage the public comment so that you can continue on with your meeting? And then there's this other thing that like I said, I've never understood.
And along with that, if we could have the procedures spelled out at the beginning of public comment, the rules and how it's going to work. And then that way we can be sure to call anything that happens in between that wasn't following the rules. So if we could just have that spelled out,
Like the little paragraph,
Mhm.
the script we read. And in addition to that script, one comment I had, Ms. Wachter, there's some decorum comments in here where members of the public are to address the council as a whole, as
Yes.
opposed to any individual. And
My second comment,
that would be something to put in the
Where's
script,
that?
I think.
What section is that?
page 54. the last sentence of the first paragraph. All remarks shall be made to the council as a body and not to any individual member. And what Councilmember Moss and I talked about was, if this is our council procedure, then we should be enforcing it. We should be talking about it. We should be explaining that this is how public comment is done here. If we do not want to do that, then we should amend our procedures and say what we do want. So there's a disconnect with what's happening and what our procedures say. And I would like to have some discussion around that.
I think also that when the procedures are not being followed, that our leaders should have the authority to cut the mic, especially if they're using bad language, and directing the attention to a particular council member. They should have the authority to stop it because you've told up front that's not to happen.
I agree with that. Does that give you enough, Ms. Walker? Mr. Brandstetter?
I think one other thing about the public comments is that we have been using a practice that allowed folks to submit for public comment, written comments. That's not currently addressed in the council rules, but that public comment can be made in writing by submitting to the clerk, and the clerk will provide them to the council, as has been our practice
In advance of the
during
meeting.
this time, but we want to codify it in the rules, we should.
Agreed.
Yeah, I've appreciated getting those comments.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Agreed. Anything else on the topic of public comment? Courteous, put in a little statement in there about courteous and respectful decorum, that kind of a thing would be great.
I'm going to go through, scrub them, take into account everything that you guys have said, and give you options or background where it's appropriate when we come back.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, feel free to stay if you'd like, because we're going to probably have a few more topics of conversation. Did you, yeah, I think we have a few more topics on this council rules. Ms. Farmer.
There's one more. It's regarding some previous conversations. I don't think we had a chance to fully discuss the possibility of moving back to virtual meetings. I know that hospital cases are finally coming down very slowly, but we are at the beginning of winter and all bets are off. We have a highly contagious variant, and I, for one, would like to have the discussion about us going back. I know that we're not the only council. It's a mix of councils in Pierce County being virtual and or in person. So there isn't a definitive way everybody's moving, but I would like to have the discussion.
Well, how about this? I'm looking at page 51, and it's the second paragraph from the top of the page, and it does say, 4 or more council members present for the transaction of business shall constitute a quorum, and then it defines what present means. So attendance and or voting by telephone or video conference, we might update that, but that is now in 2021, may be allowed by request in extenuating circumstances. So what we may want to discuss tonight is whether, in lieu of just extenuating circumstances, council members may, by preference, appear by telephone or virtual conference, or Zoom, or whatever the heck the appropriate term should be, video conference, virtual conference. What do you folks think about that? Or do you want to do that in certain periods of time, like pandemic, or more often than that? What's your thought? Or are you thinking about the body as a whole?
I do think that something broader than extenuating circumstances.
Right.
Okay. I think, and in truth, we've allowed that over the past
exactly
10 years. It just, if you couldn't be here, but you could be on the phone, we've never told someone, well, your reason isn't good enough.
Mhm.
And so just
So in
taking that
practice.
comment about extenuating circumstances out and just using the word option, have the option
Got it.
is
You okay with that?
better words.
So we just really want to prevent someone from vacationing like Switzerland or something and calling in every week, right? For
Well, I
3
don't know.
months or something.
May not be a bad idea.
I mean, it's not a bad idea,
Wait a minute, wait.
but I, as somebody who, unlikely to live in Switzerland for
Right.
3 to 6 months, unlike maybe 4 or 5 other members.
I think the extenuating circumstance comment was probably there because the preference is we do better together. And the interactivity is always, has more quality to it, I think.
Mhm.
But there are those extenuating circumstances where one may not feel comfortable enough to be within, 4-foot radius or whatever, one another.
And I think Councilmember Farmer brings up a good point. I mean, we still are in a pandemic. We don't know each other's pre-existing conditions and various things like that. So there may be days when, well, I'll tell you, like last week, I came close to be like, I think I'd rather call in, right? And I felt okay, right? And came, but I'm not sure that that's, I want to, it's great to have, especially in the time of the pandemic or a flu season or something like that, to be able to say, I don't, I'd rather call in if you guys are okay with that.
I think that would be something that I would consider as well, because we cannot distance ourselves that well here. And it's not that we are looking at just here, but people in and out of here.
Mhm.
And I am in that category that I need to be more cautious.
Mhm.
So that was one of the reasons that I was considering virtual as opposed to coming in. It's just during the winter months. And then we see how the pandemic goes.
Ms. Farmer?
I am concerned that we've had some technological issues recently. There was one where we couldn't hear Mary or Mary couldn't hear us, and then we couldn't hear you, we could see you. And I worry that if I chose to stay home or if somebody needed to stay home, then they couldn't participate fully. And so I don't know if this is even doable with our current technological situation. Sometimes it works, but.
Well, I agree with you there. I attended the Rotary meeting virtually last week, and I was amazed at how good both the sound and the visual acuity was with the members, both virtual and in person. If Rotary can do it on a shoestring, we should be able to do it here in the city of Lakewood. To have really robust, I was shocked at how good it was, to be honest. I mean, the sound clarity was
Talk into the
fabulous.
mics.
Right. Anyway, it's worth looking at, and I think talking into the mics would certainly be helpful.
On our diocese, the cord is not, we cannot pull our mic
Right.
up this close. So if we can extend that cord,
Right.
that would be helpful. Because I cannot hear the mayor at all.
He needs to speak into the microphone. Yeah.
But I can't hear Mary, and I'm on the other end of the
There
dais.
is a weird thing from one end to the other. It's very difficult to hear.
Yeah, having the mic more mobile where and then if we, because we like to look at each other when we're speaking, but we need to have that mobility. It's funny that we're having this conversation.
Right. But I don't want to take away from your first point. Is it your thought that you might want to have us consider being virtual, all of us, for a period of time?
I will abide by the will of the group. I wasn't sure that we had a full conversation about it where everybody got to speak their piece, so.
What do you think?
I
This is a
would-
time to chat about it, for sure.
I would posit that we should probably go virtual.
As a clarification, you're legally required to be virtual right now. You're not required to be live, but you are required to do virtual.
Got it. Okay. How about thoughts on that? It's on the floor for discussion, heartfelt discussion.
I have a thought.
Say again?
I have a thought. So if we do go virtual, I would encourage all of you to have a good camera, have some good lighting. There's some things that we could probably get if you're gonna do it at home. So I think it would make it easier for everyone to hear, to see, to all of that kind of stuff. So maybe we could talk about that if we do end up going virtual, because I still have issues like, what are they saying? You know, so the same issues, I think, are in both places. So I'd love that that got addressed if everyone was at home.
But before we get to the at-home amenities, what is your thought about Councilmember Farmer's suggestion about virtual meetings at this stage?
I'm pretty easy. Whatever the majority wants to do, I'm fine with. For me, myself, I could do it from home, no problem. I got the lighting, I got the camera, I got it all.
You got
So
the action,
got it.
lighting, camera, action.
But I want everyone else to have it too. So if that's what the majority of people want to do.
Mr. Brandstetter, what are your thoughts?
I prefer to have the option to have an in-person meeting. But I'm okay with anyone who chooses to attend virtually. That maybe for three reasons. One, the personal one is I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum of Councilmember Bell in terms of the technology that I have at home in terms of doing that. Trying to do it on the iPad is very, very frustrating. That my laptop is 8 years old, okay, and well, I think it has a good camera. It some apps it likes and some it doesn't. And third is that when I interact with all of you, your body language is as important to me as what you say.
Right, no, I agree with that. And I'll just say the one or two times I have attended virtually, and again, I'm with you, I would do what the will of the majority wants to do. I'm fine being here, fine being at home, but I truly felt like a second-class citizen the last couple of times I was virtual because no one would even call on me because I was waving my hand. So we got to do a better job of figuring out how we can have kind of like the Hollywood Squares approach on Zoom on the screen so you can actually see us who are appearing virtually as opposed to having a little tiny box in a hand that might show up with a fingernail that looks ingrown or whatever. We just have to have a better opportunity to be present if we're going to be virtual. And on the in-home sort of thing, I think one thing we should try to do is get help with the consistent background filter, whatever they are, so it shows the dais or whatever it is in our home things, just so it's consistent. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So that's my thought.
And as we go forward, this virus could disappear, and we will have no worries. But I just feel comfortable within the next 2 or 3 months being more cautious.
Absolutely. Are you okay if we have a hybrid where you're comfortable
I'm fine.
beaming in from home?
Mhm.
So I sense that that's kind of the direction is people are absolutely fine with a hybrid arrangement, whereas some may call in as long as the technology really works and you feel included.
Then maybe the different things, the backgrounds, there's a little camera you can put on, there's little lights, things like that that might be of help.
But I want to
In
honor
different ways
Yeah.
too. You know, like Mike said, he doesn't feel like he has the technology.
right.
So if there's some way to get assistance to help with those kinds of things, I think that would be really good.
I
a
think we
great
should make
resource.
sure we provide some technological resources for any council member, just like an iPad. It's another piece of equipment, city-owned, but it's for city business. So if Mr. Branstad or whomever might need something to enhance their participation, we should do what we can to get that.
If it's just a matter of a light, just tell me what kind of light it is and I'll just get it. If it's just that, I've tried adjusting my camera. I've moved lights all around in my room and it's still dark.
Well, it's certainly something we can talk about,
Yeah.
I think, because it's getting the little camera on top of your laptop. If you have a laptop, and it may be something that Mr. White can help if he has to physically go and help set that up so that it's done right, we can do that. Hybrid, Mr. Branstad.
Yeah, and I would note that just recently, we held a special meeting where all of us were virtual. You know, where we convened a special meeting, you know, and that worked. That worked fine. So a variety of those things.
It worked fine because we were all on Zoom and we could see each
Yeah.
other much better.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the hybrid thing is a little funky. We got to figure out
Yeah,
the.
and
ropes of that.
it was a special meeting of where there wasn't really, because we were just going to adjourn into an executive session. There wasn't really all that much concern about the public's access, because all the public would have been able to see is the mayor saying, we're going into executive session, and the mayor coming back and saying, we're done.
Right.
But that, but I think that what is good for us in terms of being virtual or having options, you know, that by reference, whatever options we give ourselves, we are giving that to staff who are going to be with us to do that. And in the same way that we're giving it to the public if they want to comment. So
Very good. Okay, go ahead.
So Ms. Wachter, explain to me, because I'm now thoroughly confused, because my day job, they're back really one person, they do hybrid because one individual is usually not there. Oh, one individual is usually not there. So I just assumed kind of everybody was doing hybrid now, but you're saying that under the rules that we're working under, we should be, or I'm not quite understanding. So we really are in a mode where we should be remote now.
I'm reading from the actual guidance right now.
Okay.
There's a little chart that they made. Is virtual remote required? Yes, subject to conditions in Proclamation 20-28.14 at page 3, including that there be telephonic access at a minimum and all attendees can hear each other at the same time. In person, required? No. That is the current state. And I believe that a lot of jurisdictions have kind of stayed just completely virtual. There are some others that are trying to do in person, but when you try to do in person under this proclamation, you must then end up hybrid.
Right.
But there is no
question.
option where it's just live.
That begs the question that if we didn't have this pandemic thing, would in-person be required under state law?
The requirement is currently because of a gubernatorial proclamation.
Right.
As you know, there have been many of them at this point, but this is one particular of them that specifically addresses this. I think reasonable minds can differ about what they think life is going to look like on the other side, because there are those who believe that the virtual access is very beneficial to the public process. I don't know that everyone would agree on that, but there is some mindset to that effect. So it is distinctly possible that once the proclamations drop, then it will be, you can go back about your business, but we're requiring a virtual aspect. I don't know. That's getting out the magic 8-ball and hoping for the best.
Okay.
But right now, Councilmember Boki, the answer to your question is the virtual is required, in person is not required.
Mr. Caulfield, did you have any suggestions or recommendations for this body with your sage advice and wisdom?
My recommendation, just based on a health issue, and no offense to, but there's some vulnerable folks sitting up on that dais. And my recommendation would be that you go to a virtual meeting. The fact is that you are the only city council that actually is currently doing all in-person meetings. For example, Tacoma, here in the Pierce County area, here in Pierce County, the cities that we interact with on a regular basis. For example, Tacoma, DuPont, Steilacoom, and Fircrest are all virtual and expect to be for the foreseeable future. University Place just went to the hybrid model, which you just talked about, where if council members want to come in person, they can. However, generally speaking, the meeting is still virtual. Likewise, Puyallup is doing that, though they're up to 5 council members coming in person and 2 to 3 who are coming in virtually. So that's that trend is kind of the similar around the state of Washington and Puget Sound. So, but if you ask for my recommendation would be to meet virtually, and I know it's a tough choice. If you've noticed, my staff are all coming in virtually whenever they can. So
Mr. Buer was virtual tonight.
Well, we recently had a COVID case here in City Hall too. So thankfully though, at this point in time, it's only one person.
Well, with that recommendation, is there further discussion on Ms. Farmer's thought? I would be fine going virtual if it's the will of the council. It sounds like Ms. Moss would probably prefer that for the time being. It sounds like Ms. Farmer would prefer that for the time being.
I would prefer that, and we can always reassess
Exactly, yeah.
every couple weeks if we want to.
Are you guys okay with that? As long as we help Mr. Brandstetter in the short term get some technology, we can do that. I'll get him a pen light.
The truth is, it's maybe not technology that I need, but just a better operator of the technology.
I'll send you my teenage daughter right before the meeting. She's quite good at this. She saved me on many occasions figuring out the speaker thing on Zoom. I'd say, Allison, get over here, please. Okay, so it sounds like the consensus of the order here is to, if you're okay with it, it sounds like you are, Mr. Caulfield, that we would go virtual starting next week.
If that's the council's direction, we can do it beginning next week.
It sounds like that's where we are. So why don't we do that, and we'll try it for at least, I think we should try it 30 days at a time and see how it goes with folks and see how this pandemic plays out.
Could I make a recommendation there, Deputy Mayor? I would recommend just to, right now, just look through the end of November and see where we are at the beginning of December.
Very good. Well, thank you. Good conversation, everyone. I know it's challenging and we're all trying to do the right thing. So, okay, so items tentatively scheduled for the, yes, sir.
Before we depart from the council rules, because I assume that what we're looking at it is in the near term having a resolution adopting a revised set of rules to move forward. And a couple of housekeeping things on that. Under the consent agenda, unlike the regular agenda where the rules require the clerk to read the items that are on the regular agenda, our practice is that she reads the items that's on the consent agenda, but the consent agenda section doesn't state that. In fact, it omits that, and which she should probably add that in. And the section on approval of final plats, we adopted an ordinance some time ago.
Which section?
where it's under 3-6 under the consent agenda. Approval of final plats is no longer a council function. And so I think could
3.6E, he's looking at, Ms. Wachter.
yeah, those housekeeping items could come out.
Very good. Anything else for the good of the order? Well, thank you. And certainly as things come up, we can go along, but perhaps by next time, this would be an item, I think, on a consent agenda. The updates to the council rules of procedure. And it would also be helpful to float the draft script, the new script for public comment so that we can all see it and approve it. I think that will be helpful, especially as we go virtual. So, all right, very good discussion. Thank you. So items for October 4th's regular council meeting are listed, but it's proclamation declaring the month of October 2021 as Healthcare Heroes Month. Proclamation recognizing National Hispanic Heritage Month. Proclamation declaring the month of October 2021 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Our Youth Council report, the Clover Park School District report, a Point Defiance bypass route update, authorization of an amendment to the agreement with Pierce County for road and traffic maintenance services, and the execution of agreement with Hogan and Associates for about $260,000 for design and engineering services for turf infield at currently named Fort Steilacoom Park. A little bit of humor there, just small. Review of the interlocal agreement for emergency management services and review of the youth and teen programs under the city manager's reports. So with that, turning to Mr. Caulfield, reports by the city manager.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, council members. Just a few items to report. You might have noticed a lack of construction activity at the overflow parking lot at American Lake Park. And you might recall we acquired this property earlier this summer. And the intent was to try and create some temporary parking there for the summer months. However, by the time we acquired the property and closed on it, we had kind of lost that window. So rather than moving forward with some temporary improvements here in the next, month or two, we're just going to move forward and, with the permanent improvements and bring that back as a contract consideration for this body sometime in early 2022 and do it as a one-step process as opposed to a two-step. Also, as you know, unfortunately, our senior activity center has been closed. We rent that facility or that portion of the facility from Pierce County. Pierce County Superior Court, because of COVID, has taken over all of that facility, uses overflow for a number of their trials. The good news is actually they haven't used it at a level that they had expected to. And the reason being is because they report that a lot of their cases are not going to trial, so they're being settled. However, they still have a need for the facility. With that said, our Parks and Recreation Director, Mary Dodsworth, last week followed up with Pierce County Facilities and said, we know you said at the end of December, but we just, we're trying to stay out ahead of our own planning cycle, because if they do allow us to come back in January, it's going to take us time, energy, effort, to bring back our volunteers, our instructors to get the senior activity center up and running. So we'd like to know sooner rather than later. So the message we got from Pierce County Facilities was at this point in time, the court is going to need to use that facility through the end of December. It's still kind of unknown into 2022 as well. However, Pierce County Facilities did state that they would express, our questions and where we are that would like to have the facility back to the courts, and hopefully they'll get back to us. So just wanted to let you know we're trying to be a little proactive there so that we can, hopefully, knock on wood, reopen our senior activity center in the early part of 2022. Also, as you know, this body, as a part of the current biennial budget, you approve funding for us to add a second mental health professional as part of our behavioral health contact team. It's a partnership with Greater Lakes Mental Health. Unfortunately, Greater Lakes Mental Health was not able to find the perfect mental health professional, which actually not a bit of a surprise. A lot of agencies are having trouble just finding all kinds of positions. However, what they did identify, and we wholeheartedly concur with, is actually a therapist and case manager individual who's going to join our team. So that person, he's going to join our behavioral health contact team sometime in October. I don't know if it's, I think it's early to middle part of October. So I just wanted to let you know, it's taken some time to hire that position. We had hoped to have somebody on board about the July or August timeline, but it's taken us a little bit longer. Also, want to thank you all for attending the 25th anniversary of Lakewood on Saturday. I want to recognize and thank Mary Dosworth and her team. They did an outstanding job and pulling all of that together. Also having to turn on the dime a couple of weeks ago from the proverbial Category 5 hurricane that was coming into our region. But I'll let that one go. I'll let that one go. It was a good call and moving it out to last Saturday because the weather was just absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to give Ms. Dosworth and her team credit for that as well. I talked to Ms. Dosworth earlier this afternoon, and I think somebody on the council asked me, how many people attended. We didn't do a count, but just based on our conversations with some of the food truck vendors as well as some of the other vendors, they think it was at least a couple of thousand people that showed up and were kind of flowing through the area over the period of the event. But that was a great way to recognize 25 years of incorporation. So next up, there's a couple of there's a city-sponsored event and a city-partnered event. The city-partnered event is the 9th annual Fab Fest, the Film, Art, and Book Festival at the McGavick Center, and that's over a 3-day period from beginning on Friday afternoon, October 8th, and then the 9th and the 10th. And if you haven't had a chance to attend that, highly recommend it. And then on October 9th, personally, one of my favorite events is the Truck and Tractor Day, and that's only because they have the pumpkin launching site lined up. So I'd like to go down there and launch some pumpkins. But in any event, that event is a go at this point in time, and that will be from noon to 3 p.m. again on Saturday, October 9th. So, and then we are in the process of going through our mid-biennial budget review. So you can expect, typically in the past, the mid-biennial budget review has been more of a, generally speaking, a housekeeping update. But this year it's going to be a little bit more than that. And part of that has to do with you just recently adopted goals for 2021 through 2024. So I will be coming forward with additional asks for resources to implement a number of those. For example, this body approved a climate change chapter as part of your comp plan. So I'm going to be coming forward and requesting a sustainability position of some sort to implement that and to get that going. That's not something we can just absorb in our own, with our own existing resources. So just wanted to just point that out. You heard from Mr. Buer this evening on tree preservation. That was another item that we have tentatively identified a funding request to help facilitate that. So I was happy to hear the conversation and the dialogue on the city council on that. So those are just some couple of examples, but more to follow with Ms. Kraus on your next study session, actually, which will be on October 11th. Also, she was hoping to have our financial forecast ready at that meeting. Just given everything that we got going on right now, particularly with the ARPA funds, we've had to bump that out to November. But one of the things that Ms. Kraus and I will have done is that when we bring forward the mid-biennial budget review, her and I are going to make sure that, generally speaking, it does pencil out over a 2-3 year biennial process or a 6-year period. So more to follow on that. Also, revenue projections are doing a whole lot better than anticipated. So that's a bit of good news as well. Though as quickly as it can come together, it can fall apart. But I continue to look at the glasses being half full as opposed to being half empty. So some good news there. And then also later in October, your second study session, Ms. Kraus and Mr. Busich will be in front of you with some transportation funding options to fund those transportation projects that you had identified a couple of months ago. So we'll have that and hopefully have that all come together as part of the budget by the end of the year. And then we can really roll into 2022 and 2023 really, really strong. So
Great.
but that's my report.
I was trying to decide if I had a question or not. I will turn, yeah, I'll bring it up in a council comment for you. How's that? Okay, we know we've got an executive session, so we've got some comments by each of us. I will just go around the room real quickly if we can keep them short. Ms. Moss?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I would just echo what Mr. Caulfield has mentioned about the 25th anniversary. It was absolutely wonderful. I had invited some friends from Ruston Way, and they were totally impressed. They kept saying, oh, look at Lakewood, look at Lakewood. And so in the location, everybody loved it. It was wonderful. And LMCC got 2 more members. So
That's great.
every time we go out, someone finds us that have been looking for something like that to do. So we're excited about that.
Well, thank you for spending so much time putting it together out there.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the short but nice dance too. We had.
Yeah, we got to do better.
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Boki?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw my 2 bits in on that too. I just thought it was very well done, and considering that we lost the previous week and the plan was really built around that previous weekend. And then I think staff did a wonderful job in putting that together and standing there, really the Colonial Center really in its what exactly we had hoped for, right? And it looked great, and it held a lot of people, and there were a number of activities going on. So the size works, and I think it was just a really very positive event. And kudos to the employees for putting it together.
Ms. Farmer?
Well, I'm gonna echo the theme. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine earlier in the day, and I was describing the event, and they said, well, where's the Colonial Plaza? And then somebody chimed in very snarkily and said, oh, it's where they spent all that money on those bricks. And that's all it's there is bricks. And all I could think about for the 4 hours that I was there is what a darn good way to activate this brick plaza. I mean, it wasn't about infrastructure. It was about people. It was about family
Absolutely.
and community and coming together and celebrating. And yes, it was about infrastructure. I mean, the improvements that y'all made before I got on the council was amazing, but infrastructure, people. So it was great.
Creating senses of place. Ms. Bell?
Thank you. I thought it was an amazing event. The venue is so exciting. I cannot wait to see what will happen there. I've heard some rumblings of things that are in the works. So I think that's so wonderful. And I was just very happy to be a part of it and to participate in the 25th anniversary. And thank you to the staff again for being so flexible and nimble and putting it together, and everything was just wonderful.
Mr. Branstetter?
Yeah, I also had that really great time and impression of the sense of community that was there at that event to go through. And I think that it also fostered in the mind of some of the folks that were there, some events for their own organizations, that might be a good spot and place to do, which will greatly help, I think, to be able to go and do that. And I was trying to imagine how much that will be enhanced once we get that artwork in place with all those little windows with logos and icons about that, to be able to go forward and do that. So I think we're going on, and I was I meant to ask the city manager in his updates, getting to the term about persons being taken to the Pierce County Jail and failing booking. I wasn't quite sure what that meant.
Generally speaking today, Councilmember Branstetter, that means, it's COVID related of some sort, or they were conducting themselves inappropriately that the jailers just didn't want to handle, but it's typically COVID related.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Well, very good. I will echo the comments on the 25th anniversary. Fantastic day. Thank you for working on the weather. It was perfect. The venue was great. I spent a lot of time talking to vendors out there, and two things came through loudly and clearly. Number one, they're very happy with our staff. They are very appreciative of Sally Martinez for the outreach work. They lauded her work as an extraordinary manager because she's accessible, she responds, she provides good information. When I asked about location, vis-a-vis the farmer's market, where many of them have been for the year, at the park versus the plaza, they loved the plaza, at least the ones I spoke to. Not that they didn't like the park, but they really enjoyed the plaza. So the more we can do out there, the better, because it is an infrastructure project that we put a lot of heart and soul and resources into. And I think it's coming to fruition. I just also wanted to give a kudos to Jim, our communications manager. I think he's doing a fantastic job, not just being on site and doing some great work with photography and members of the public, but also responding positively and in correcting misinterpretations of stuff that's going on out there. I think he's doing a great job of that. My only concern is the poor guy is only one guy. And it might be worth, maybe it'll come up in the biennial budget process, whether or not there may be some value in having even a contract FTE or a partial half FTE or something to do some of that work, because you've got great momentum now. And I wouldn't want to lose it by burning the guy out. He's just doing a great job. I think that's just me, but anyway.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wow. One more and we've got a quorum. Anyway, thank you for that. He's doing good work, and he's a character, but he's everywhere. The poor guy is everywhere. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Believe me. Okay. I am now announcing that we're going to recess into executive session for approximately 15 minutes pursuant to RCW 42.30.110(1) to discuss with legal counsel representing the city litigation or potential litigation to which the city, the governing body, or a member acting in an official capacity is or likely to become a party. And public knowledge regarding the discussion is likely to result in adverse legal or financial consequence to the city. City council is not expected to take action following the executive session. Following the executive session, the city will adjourn the meeting. A closed session will then follow pursuant to RCW 42.30.140 sub 4. We are in executive session.